This is some additional help explanation related to Lesson 17, which is entitled Confidence Intervals for the Mean, where the standard deviation is unknown. So again, I want to kind of give you a heads up about what information you need or what information you should be given in the problem. The primary difference between this particular lesson and lesson 16 is that in this lesson, you do not know the population standard deviation. In lesson 16, which you just completed, it was also called confidence intervals for the mean, but it was SD, or standard deviation, known. Okay, so the difference is in this particular lesson, you do not know the population standard deviation. Now, when you do know that, remember, we are calculating the Z interval. In lesson 17, where we do not know the population standard deviation, we're going to be calculating the T interval. It's called the T interval because it is based on or related to the student's T distribution that we have talked about briefly before. So that's why it's called the T interval. Now, if you'll remember, the primary difference between the student's T distribution and the normal distribution is that in the student's T distribution, you have more area out here in the tail. The T distribution does not taper off near as fast or near as quickly as the student's T distribution. So that's the difference. So again, as you think about these problems and what information you need to determine the confidence interval for the mean when the standard deviation is unknown, you need X bar, which is the sample mean. You need N, which is your sample size. You will have S, which is the sample standard deviation. Now again, remember, this is different because with the lesson 16, you had the population standard deviation. So it makes a difference. You have to pay attention. You have the sample mean, the sample size, and the sample standard deviation. And you also need the confidence level. And again, the confidence level is usually stated as a percentage, although it could be given as a decimal. Also, typically, if you have a sample size less than 30, again, you want to be told that the lesson or that the distribution is approximately normal. Okay? And these problems can be presented in two different ways. In one case, you are given those four pieces of information outright in the problem, and in another case, you are given the raw data and you may have to determine that information for yourself, both of which can be done on the calculator. Okay, so we're going to jump down into an example. Okay, and it says, a company has developed a new type of light bulb and wants to estimate its mean lifetime. A simple random sample of 12 bulbs had a sample mean lifetime of 649 hours with a sample standard deviation of 26 hours. It is reasonable to believe that the population is approximately normal. Find the lower bound of the 95% confidence interval for the population mean lifetime of all bulbs manufactured by this new process. Okay, so again, as we think about the information we need X bar, which is our sample mean. We need N, which is our sample size. We need S, which is our sample standard deviation. We need our confidence level. So if I go back through and I read, it says we have a simple random sample of 12 bulbs. So my sample size is 12. Had a sample mean lifetime of 649 hours with a sample standard deviation of 26. So my sample standard deviation is 26. It does tell us that it's approximately normal. And the confidence level it wants us to do is 95%. And we often have to convert that to a decimal to enter it into the calculator. So in this particular problem, you've been given all of the information that you need outright. And one thing that you can do, guys, is as you're working through these problems, make yourself like a little table like I did here. X bar, N, S, and CL, and write down the information as you go. So I'm going to pull up my calculator, and we're going to go to Stat, arrow to the right 2 times to highlight test. In this case, we're doing a T interval because we do not know the population standard deviation. We're going to use T as in tiger, which is option 8. So I've scrolled down to T interval, and I'm going to enter. And it gives me 2 options. It allows me to input the raw data if I have it, but I don't, or I can simply enter the stats. I have the stats, so I'm going to arrow to the right to stats so that you have the blinking light on it, and then I hit enter. And then I'm going to enter the information that was given to me in the problem. Okay, so I arrow down, and next to the mean, I'm going to enter the value 649, which was given in the problem. Arrow down. My sample standard deviation given in the problem was 26. My sample size was 12. My confidence level is 0.95. I'm going to scroll down to calculate, highlight it, enter, and on the screen it gives me my values for the lower bound and the upper bound. We have 632.48 to 665.52. Okay, so I'm going back to my paper. So from the calculator, we get the interval, and it's written in parentheses, 632.48, comma, 665.52. Okay, now remember, in the way these answers are expressed, the first number in this set of parentheses is your lower bound, and the second number is your upper bound. And it's important that you pay attention to the question. So if I go back and I look at my question, it says find the lower bound. Okay, so I'm looking for the lower bound. So the lower bound would be 632.48. It asked me to round to the nearest integer, so that's going to round to 632. So the lower bound of a 95% confidence interval for the population mean lifetime of all bulbs would be 632 hours. Now it asked me not to indicate the units, so all I have to do is enter the number. Okay, so that's an example of when you're given all of the information and you simply have to enter it into the calculator. Now, let's look at a second example. In this second example, okay, it says 6 measurements were made of the mineral content in percent of spinach, with the following results. It is reasonable to assume that the population is approximately normal. And again, they give you those 6, this time they give you those 6 values. So notice that in this particular story, you get your 6 individual values. You get what we call the raw data, okay? It doesn't give us the sample mean, nor does it give us the sample standard deviation. Okay, so we're going to have to kind of figure those things out on our own. Then it says find the lower bound of the 95% confidence interval. Round your answer to 3 decimal places and don't include the units. Now, I do know either by counting, okay, or by reading, because it says 6 measurements, but I can tell 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay, and it tells me that my confidence level is 95%. So in this case, I don't know what the sample mean is. I know that my sample size is 6. I don't know my sample standard deviation. And my confidence level is again 95%. And I'm also told that we can assume the distribution is approximately normal. Okay? So I can still use my calculator to do this problem. I just have to enter the information slightly differently. So if I go back to stat and arrow to the right 2 times to test and scroll down again to T interval, okay, this time I have the data. So I'm going to actually input the data. And it tells me that I need to put that into list 1. So before I can actually perform these calculations, I have to enter the data that's given to me into list 1. So I would do stat, option 1 under the edit menu is to edit. Okay, I have something in there, so I need to get rid of that first. So I'm going to clear it out, stat, and I'm going to clear list 1, stat, edit, and now I'm going to enter those 6 numbers. So I would enter 19.1, enter, 20.1, enter. Whoops, I didn't get 20. Make sure you enter it correctly. 2, 0, 0.1, then 20.8, 20.8 again, 20.5, and 21.5. So I've entered the 6 numbers. They're in list 1. Now, the calculator in its mind or in its brain is going to calculate the sample mean and the sample standard deviation for me as it is performing or doing the calculation of the interval. So I'm going to go back to stat, arrow over to test, scroll down again to T interval, which is option 8, enter. This time I want to enter the data. My data we put in list 1, frequency defaults to 1, and I'm doing a 95% interval. And now I'm going to calculate. and it tells me or gives me the interval as 19.615 comma 21.318. Now it actually also figures for me the mean and the standard deviation that you can see there. That's not part of the question, so I don't need that piece. Okay, so we would have our interval is 19.615 comma 21.318. Okay, again, remember in this scenario that this first number is your lower bound and the second number is your upper bound. Again, be extra careful, pay attention to what they ask for. It says find the lower bound. So the lower bound for this particular question is 19.615, and in this case they do ask you to round to 3 decimal places. Okay, so you want to use the whole entire value. You don't want to round to the nearest whole. That's one of the biggest things, guys, is paying attention to whether they want lower bound or upper bound and how they want you to round.